Well, thanks everybody for jumping on here for this month's Cyber Showcase. We're going to be having a conversation about the CRI profile. Really excited about that. As always, I'm your host, Brett Rock. I'm a sales manager here with SBS Cybersecurity. I got a very special guest, well, two very special guests with me here today. First of all, I'll introduce a returning guest here for anybody who is a long-term visitor to the Cyber Showcase. About April of last year, John Goodman and I from the Cyber Risk Institute worked on kind of introducing the CRI profile as an option to replace the CAT. John is a senior vice president for the Cyber Risk Institute. He previously served as the vice president of IT management and controls and as deputy CIO for Penn Fed Credit Union, where he was primarily responsible for tech governance, cybersecurity compliance, technology risk management, all those fun things. He also, while he was there, helped contribute to the development of the profile as a volunteer until coming on board with the Cyber Risk Institute. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science and Psychology from the University of Maryland, College Park, and maintains several industry-recognized certifications, including CISSP and others, and lives in Fairfax, Virginia. So, John, hopefully I did you service there, but you're welcome to say hello and anything else you'd like to do from an introduction standpoint.
Well, I'm very grateful to be here with you again, Brett. It's been a very, I think for both of us, a very busy year. So more than happy to share kind of how things have transpired over the last year, and in particular, what's coming up over the next year or two.
Very excited about it as well. And Lindsay, I did not mean to minimize you. Again, Lindsay Hull, our fantastic content coordinator here at SBS. Lindsay is the person I lean on to handle all the fun marketing stuff at the top here. Lindsay, you want to say hi?
Hey everyone, happy to be here.
Excellent. Okay, so let's talk about the agenda just quickly. We're going to be going through our introductions and starting to wrap that up. I'll be turning it over to Lindsay to cover our marketing corner, as we always do, talk a little bit about what we've got coming up for you here in the next week or so. We're going to dive into the CRI profile. This is the genesis of this conversation. Really is we tongue-in-cheek called it the Procrastinators Guide to the CRI profile. Obviously, it's getting to the point where we need to talk about, hey, if you haven't made a decision on an updated framework since the CAT sunset, it's probably time to really buckle down and make a decision. So we're going to go through kind of from start to finish what the history of the profile is, where it came from, how adoption and response has been so far. For those of you who have been putting it off, maybe some compelling reasons to choose the CRI profile. And then, as John mentioned, he's going to be able to talk about some of the fun stuff they're doing currently and what they're going to be doing in the future. And then if we have time, we'll wrap it up with some Q&A as well. As always, just some housekeeping up front. If you do have a question, go ahead and put it in either the chat or, even better, the question and answer box that's been provided. If we don't get to those during the webinar today, certainly we will follow up with you directly. If you're interested in getting a copy of the slide deck or a copy of the recording, you'll have to go through the survey for that. We have a survey at the end. Please do take that for us. It's really helpful. And then you can indicate if you'd like a copy of the deck and or the recording, and I'll be sure to get that out to you. All right. So with that said, let's jump into things. Lindsay, I'll turn it over to you to cover some of the different marketing things we've got going on.
Thanks, Brett. Since today's session focuses on selecting your framework, I wanted to share a few resources that will help guide that decision. So first up, we have Replacing the CAT, Guide to the CRI Profile module in Track. So this blog is a great follow-up to today's discussion, covering common questions about the framework and how our CRI Profile module in Track can help support implementation of the framework. Mm-hmm. And then next, we have another FAQ for you, Transitioning from the CAT, how Track supports your move to NIST CSF. So this blog walks through key considerations when evaluating that framework and how Track can streamline that transition if that's your chosen framework. Then we also have Streamline IT Risk Assessments with Track software. So if you're still managing risk manually, this blog will explain the limitations of that and how Track can simplify the process and provide real-time visibility, no matter which framework you choose. And all of those blogs are written by our own Brett Rock and our practice guidance, so check those out. And then finally, we have Fraud Awareness for Banks, how customers help customers spot scams. And this blog highlights the importance of educating both your team and your customers about the latest financial scams And it also includes a really fun free download of the Fraudacity files, which is a field guide to recognizing and spotting today's scams. So we hope those will provide some helpful context and follow up after today's session.
I can't imagine anybody's going to want to hear more from me, but those are all good blogs that many people have chipped in on. So, Lindsay, a couple other webinars we've got coming up, I guess we can mention those.
Yeah, we have our track user group coming up really soon on March 18th. So if you're involved in that group and use track, we'd love to see you there. That's always a fun time. And we'll be talking about bringing AI into track and all of the fun new capabilities we have there. And then other webinars we have coming up on March 18th. Mark Shirla will walk through 4 steps to building a business continuity plan that works in the real world. And then on March 25th, Nick Podorotsky, our Hacker Hour host, will dive into stable coins, including what they are, why they're gaining traction, and some potential use cases you should know about. And then finally, on March 26th, Ashley Williams will share tips and tricks for getting the most out of Microsoft Copilot, including practical prompts and creating AI agents that will help you unlock its full potential. So be sure to check those out and register so you don't miss what's coming up. And I'll pass it back to you, Brett, to kick off today's discussion.
Thank you, Lindsay. Appreciate that. As always, if you get a copy of the slide deck, all of these links are live. We can help you get to the right place to sign up for these really good educational opportunities. So thanks, Lindsay. All right, John. So let's turn our attention now to the CRI profile. So we'll obviously start kind of right at the beginning. I want to, for anybody who's on the call that may not be familiar with the CRI profile at all, how would you just kind of quickly describe it in a couple of sentences? What is the profile and what can it do?
Sure. I guess the easy version is that it's really an extension and tailoring of the NIST cybersecurity framework, specifically for the financial sector. Starting back in 2016, a number of financial institutions got together. They were, at that time, even back then, not particularly happy with what the government came out with in terms of the CAT. They really thought there could be a better approach to it, particularly in relying more on industry standards, i.e. the NIST CSF, and the ability of financial institutions to then be able to take more advantage of cyber talent or technology talent that were already familiar with that, and so they wouldn't have to retrain them on the CAT, was one of the impetus for it. But it's really, we've taken the NIST CSF, we work very closely with NIST, and have extended it to some extent and tailored it for really more the regulatory expectations of what you would see in a bank examination, right?
So, yeah, I just threw up some bullets on the screen here. Some of the key talking points I always use when talking about the profile. Historically, we obviously, for those of you who are track users or followed along in this case, we really started with the NIST CSF. That was what we thought would be the one that everybody chose, and kind of started there. We built that out and released it early in the first part of last year. And then the CRI profile just kind of picked up, and we pretty quickly identified that this might be a better option for financial institutions and wound up developing that module. And I've got some statistics around adoption that I'm excited to share in a little bit. But John, just kind of going back to where you guys started with it, and obviously having volunteered even when you were not with the Cyber Risk Institute to develop the profile, can you talk a little bit about what went into the process of building it out and kind of who was involved?
Sure. It was the project originally started with about a dozen financial institutions that were in the Financial Services Sector Coordinating Council. From there, and it was kind of a project and managed under that umbrella. We involved and tried to communicate as best we could with the regulatory community about what we were doing. We engaged some consulting firms to help in structuring and deciding. We actually looked at several different frameworks when we went about this. We eventually settled on the NIST CSF as the one that was most easiest to adapt and map to a number of different regulatory expectations. So it really just grew and blossomed from there. More and more firms started to see the value of really what CRI is all about is really pooling the resources of a number of financial institutions to develop something once, and then everyone can reuse it. So we were able to get the buy-in of the regulators by making it public. We put the profile and our more recent work out publicly so that it can be used by all institutions. You don't have to be a member of CRI or contribute to its development. But it's really just like I said, everyone is working together on the same kind of thing. And what we found is, our role at CRI is really to kind of develop the ecosystem around this. So we've got, all of our member institutions, and we have a little over 150 member institutions now. We also engage very regularly with the regulatory community. They come and speak at our events, and we interact with them regulatory, not just in the US, but literally around the world. Mm-hmm. And then the other key component of the ecosystem is our partners, like SBS. We now have over 50 partner companies that are embedding the profile in their products, or consulting companies that provide profile specific assessment services, et cetera. So it really is trying, to get all of those partners working together really benefits everyone the way we see it.
So obviously, when we first spoke in April of last year, I was kind of really just getting my feet wet with the CRI profile, and we didn't even have the module at that point. I think if you remember correctly, or anybody was on that one, we kind of showed we didn't even get to show the module off. We kind of had to walk through a wireframe that we had built specifically for that purpose. So I was kind of relatively new to it and didn't know as much about it, and probably have talked about it more than anything in the last 12 months than anything else when it comes to SBS work anyway. So I feel pretty familiar with it at this point. And one of the things I really think is interesting that I would say is different than when I started, my mindset when I started talking about it, is it's not necessarily NIST versus CRI, right? John, it's you guys built off of that and they map back and forth really nicely. And it's kind of taking the NIST CSF and saying, okay, well, what does this look like if we do make it much more specific to the financial services space? Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. And in fact, in the UK, a number of firms there refer to it as NIST Plus, meaning that it's just, a lot of the challenges that the financial institutions had with NIST proper. And again, we work very closely with NIST, and we're very involved in the development of CSF version 2. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I think that the fact that there's now a govern function in the CSF is largely from the financial sector setting that expectation. But the CSF is a fabulous cross-sector tool for setting out control objectives and control expectations. However, it is somewhat abstract, right? It takes a certain amount of interpretation and development of more specific, how does this really apply to us, right, kind of thinking if you want to adopt it. I absolutely, if you want and like the NIST CSF, go for it. It's a great tool. What we've just tried to do is again try to provide much more specific guidance and implementation guidance and examples of evidence and the types of things that firms might need to put it into a more specific financial services context. One very specific example is, as you're aware, the NIST CSF has 6 functions at the top level. The CRI Profile actually added a 7th function called Extend, because you're extending your cybersecurity profile into a third party. So the extend function really covers third-party risk management much more liberally than the CSF version 2.0 does, because the financial services regulatory expectations around third-party risk management are quite heavy, right? And so we provided much more guidance than what you'll see in the CSF around that particular topic. And so there's other specific examples, not as extreme as that, a new function, where we tried to provide much more specific guidance and hopefully help to institutions on better meeting supervisory expectations.
Yeah, so I would say that second bullet from the bottom there is the one that I typically use the most when talking about the differences between them, that you guys combine more than 2,500 different regulatory expectations into one framework. Obviously, NIST is just a part of that. And I didn't prep you for this question, so I apologize.
If I could maybe comment on that, that number is going to go way up very shortly. We'll be releasing, we may talk about this later, releasing version 2.2 of the profile in April. That will have another dozen or so mappings in the mappings library. So that number will grow. I don't have a specific number right now, more in the 4,000 to 5,000 range of other regulations we've mapped to the profile.
Yeah. So my follow-up question there is just kind of, could you, without giving us all of them, obviously, because there's so many, what other sources are, the audience that's primarily financial institutions, what other sources outside of NIST CSF might they be familiar with that kind of go into that number?
Sure. So to kind of divide them into kind of industry standards versus financial services specific guidance. On the industry standards side, we now have a very extensive mapping, and we work with MITRE on mapping to the MITRE attack threat framework. So you can, trace particular threats to what control objectives are in place to address those threats. We also map to CIS, which is, of course, very popular. We work directly with CIS in a number of areas, in particular on that mapping. We now have a mapping to ISO 27002 and a number of other NIST documents, for example, NIST ransomware framework, et cetera. And then on the financial services side, a number of different regulations, NYDFS, for example, several of the FFIEC handbooks that aren't completely out of date, as well as various regulations from around the world. Monetary Authority of Singapore. Surprisingly, the profile is very big in Japan. So we've mapped to the Japan Financial Services Agency's framework, also done translation of the profile in Japanese. It's also very big in the UK. We have several mappings to Bank of England expectations. So it's a pretty wide variety of things. I think the current mapping library that's public has about 36 mappings. We'll be adding another dozen or so in the April version.
And I know we're probably going to get to this down the road, but I think people that are on the call probably are itching to hear the answer to this one. Just because you're mapping to other sources doesn't necessarily mean the content or the number of statements they have to respond to or anything will change, right?
No. It's all we're doing is saying, given a particular source document, NYDFS, for example, NYDFS, or almost all of them, for example, say in one way or another, thou shalt have a CISO that reports to the board on a periodic basis or something like that. So we make that statement one time in our diagnostic statements, and then we map to where that same expectation exists in all of the other regulatory guidance, et cetera. So you can trace it back to, okay, well, NYDFS says this, and if we do this in the profile, we will meet that NYDFS requirement.
Right.
So typically in our mappings, we usually cover at least between 80 to 95% of the source document requirement is found in the profile, right? There's always some little nits here and there that may be a little different.
And I think this slide I actually grabbed from your website. I think that lays out some of those. But let's talk a little bit about adoption and response. So I did mention up at the top here, I did pull some numbers, or I apologize. I had some people on my team that I'm very grateful for pull some numbers for me. So we launched, as I mentioned, the NIST module that we offer, the premium version of that that's licensable in probably the April timeframe last year. CRI Profile was more like late May, early June, if memory serves. Since then, we have about 170 of our customers have picked one or the other. And I will say going into that, we fully expected NIST to be the more popular option. That is actually the exact opposite. It's an 80%, 80 to 20 split in favor of CRI Profile. So about 140 of our current customers that have in track that have picked either the NIST Premium module or CRI Profile have chosen to go with the CRI Profile. So from our perspective, adoption has been very strong. One of the reasons we wanted to have this conversation is we saw an uptick early in the year, and people, I think, were starting to say, okay, I guess we need to figure this out. So we thought it would be a good time to update the conversation and talk a little bit about adoption. So, John, you mentioned you have about 150 members of the CRI, the Cyber Risk Institute. I know that you guys don't necessarily track adoption because, again, it's a free spreadsheet that can be downloaded and used. But what have you noticed in terms of the pace of membership or adoption that has taken place since the CAT sunsetted in August of last year?
Well, we've certainly saw, as you mentioned, it's very difficult for us to judge adoption because we give it away for free on our public website, so we literally have no firm idea of how many are adopting it. We get surprised quite often when we hear of a firm, for example, Cap One came to us a few months ago and said, "Hey, we'd like to join as a member." We said, "Sure, that we'd love to have you as a member." And they said, "We've been using the profile for about 3 years now." So it's like, oh, great. So, but anyway, in response to your question, we have certainly seen the number of CRI memberships in what we call the Tier 4 category, which would be the community institutions, that has grown substantially since last year. We always had a good sound number of smaller institutions, but now we have a very, very large contingent, and we have separate peer group meetings among that group and that kind of thing. We've also started seeing credit unions join, which we had not seen previously, despite what the NCUA has announced relative to the CAT sunset. We are seeing some credit unions moving away. We're also, I think, developing much stronger relationships now with like the Conference of State Bank Supervisors. That relationship has grown quite a bit, as well as the Mid-Sized Banking Coalition. They very much want to partner and make sure that they're providing the right kind of resources to their members. So it's definitely grown, unquestionably.
Yeah. So I want to get into the one big question everybody always asks me in terms of the CRI profile in a second, and it's not going to surprise anybody on the call that it deals with the way examiners are handling the change to a new profile and things like that. And I know we have examiners on the call here with us, so I promise we'll be gentle with everything there. But John, I thought we would start maybe with just kind of an overall assessment from your perspective. The regulatory environment has changed a little bit. Is there anything that kind of stands out to you about those changes in terms of the examinations that you're hearing about?
Yes, there have certainly been changes in particularly this administration. What we have heard directly from the regulatory agencies themselves, they've been very vocal about some of these things. They are very definitely focusing much more on, what I would call cyber hygiene and true cyber risk issues, more so than maybe some of the enterprise technology risk management types of activities. In particular, focusing much more on Gramm-Leach-Bliley because there's very clear regulatory authority that goes with that. So they have, and they are more so than some people might know, dealing with reductions in staffing on their side, both on the policy um, organizations within them, as well as the supervisory organizations. They have seen substantial staff reductions, and so they're really just trying to focus on what's important from a cyber risk management perspective. We have, however, seen, we almost liken it to kind of a balloon. If you kind of push in one direction, you're going to get it expanding in others. You do see some of the state regulators starting to step up a little more, in particular NYDFS, as well as some of the international regulatory activities have been picking up, particularly in the EU and Singapore. They've been a bit more aggressive in their approaches to things.
Yeah, so kind of maybe more of a focus on the blocking and tackling to some degree.
Exactly.
So
Which
the
I
question,
think is a good thing.
yeah,
It's good for everyone.
I agree. So I will say the biggest question I always get, and I think this is just because the CRI profile, while it's not new to you, John, certainly, and probably not new to a lot of institutions, but to our customers in particular, it was a relatively new thing. We had a lot of education that went on in the first, probably the last, like I said, 12 months or so. The question I get more than anything is how are examiners dealing with the CRI profile? So the CAT sunsets in August. It does seem like of last year, it does seem like the message that I've been hearing is the CAT was still going to be good for some period of time if you had done it recently enough. Obviously, we're kind of getting to the point, and we'll talk more about this in a little bit, where it's probably not going to be the case any longer. So, if a customer or somebody on the call here picked the CRI profile and has not gone through an examination yet, what can they expect? Are the examiners accepting it? What does that look like?
Well, and again, this comes straight from the regulators. They've been very clear that, yes, you can continue using the CAT, but you start running greater and greater risk of it not being deemed a sufficient assessment, right? And primarily because it hasn't been updated in a while. I think its last update was 2017. So the longer you continue to go, the more they're going to lose faith in your ability to adequately manage your risks, right? So our advice is always have the discussion with your regulator about what you're doing and what you're thinking. If you're thinking you may want to stay on the CAT, for example, for your next assessment, while you're still planning on how you're going to shift to another type of assessment, document that, talk to your examiner about it, and make sure that they're comfortable with your approach. But usually, if you have some good sound, reasoning, and you're showing them you're paying attention to it and you're taking some action, you will usually be okay. But I wouldn't, expect to blindly be able to continue using the CAT for the next 5 years and not experience some challenges to that approach.
But in terms of the CRI profile, how have examiners been talking about that? I mean, it's something that they're accepting and feel comfortable with.
You should not have any barriers at all in using the CRI profile. As you saw in the CAT sunset statement, it was cited as one of the acceptable replacement frameworks. And that's actually a role that we can help play. If you are hearing from your examiners that they're having problems with it or having problems with any of the other ones that they recommend, let us know, because we can have the conversation with them about it. It's not unusual, particularly in this environment, where there may be lack of communication between the policy group within the regulator and the supervisory group that's actually conducting the examinations. We can help with some of those situations as needed.
So what kind of feedback are you getting from institutions that are using the profile? Is there any anything that surprised you, any negative feedback that has caused you guys to rethink, maybe we need to do something a little bit differently? Kind of what has that looked like since the cat sunset last year?
Um, well, I'd say two areas of significance. One is if you look at the profile as it's published on our website, it is a very big thing. It's the full version that can be used by the biggest of the big. And so we did create a much more trimmed down, tailored, we call it the community institution profile, that only includes the tier 4 diagnostic statements. It strips out a lot of the other worksheets and things like that. So it's a much more simplified version that we can provide where needed. We don't put it on our website, but it is available. And we came up along with that with a much less expensive non-voting member option that we call the community institution member, where you can get that. You can still get access to some of our other content and so forth. But we try to come up with a package of CRI membership services to address that.
Sure.
But we also, I think that the thing that's, I don't want to say surprised us. We knew it was going to come, but we're still not in a good position yet to address. And that is, we get a lot of comments around the fact that the CAT has the inherent risk profile component, and there's nothing like that in the profile, intentionally so. We are currently, and we'll explore this a bit more in when we talk about the upcoming things. We're currently developing essentially a common risk register for the sector, which we see as a much more appropriate replacement for that inherent risk profile. I was never happy with the CAT's inherent risk profile because, to my mind, you really need to be talking about what specific risks are our organization facing and what controls are in place to address those specific risks. The CAT kind of characterizes inherent risk in a broad, this is how risky your organization is, but it doesn't tie those to the specific controls that can address the risks. So anyway, it's a fairly long-winded response to say we intentionally did not provide an inherent risk profile, but we believe we're working right now on something that should provide a much more appropriate tool for risk management purposes.
That's awesome. That's very exciting, and hopefully we can get some of that stuff incorporated in track as you're moving along as well. But yeah, we will absolutely touch on some of what's coming down the road here in a minute. Before we get there, though, I think this is a pretty obvious answer to this question, at least in my mind. Why do you think this is the best option for financial institutions? And I will, maybe before I even let you answer that, I will also say one thing that surprised me a little bit is the number of credit union customers that we have that have already moved to the profile as well. I think being proactive and them saying, well, if the CAT went away, chances are good ACETs, even though the NCUA is saying it's going to be around for a while, they could kind of see it moving in that direction as well. So, what makes this such a good fit for a financial institution?
Well, I guess as we were talking about before, it was really designed and built by financial institutions to try to fill those needs. When we, as the profile was being built, we absolutely had small community institutions involved in its development. I know it does. Can be a very complex beast, particularly as you look at it for the first time. But really, it's that, again, going back to that concept of building the ecosystem of all of the people working together to try to pool resources so that everyone's not having to do the same work is really what we're trying to do. So if we're developing and providing a tool for the financial sector, it's because the financial sector wants it. It's because they've contributed to it and they think it's the right thing. I have no problem, conceptually with people using other frameworks. There
Hmm.
are other very good frameworks out there. It's just you would need to look at, kind of the pros and cons of each. How much tailoring or how much work is it going to take us to adapt one versus the other? Hopefully, we've made it as easy as possible to be able to adopt the profile. And I think you likely have a question later about, how might you go about doing that? But it's
Right.
really, as I said, partner organizations like you that are facilitating that.
Hmm.
Um, um, there's I know you all have a very large group of like-minded companies doing the same thing, and that's the kind of community that we want to build.
So, two things that I always like talking about the CRI profile, and I appreciate any thoughts you may have on these, is obviously we do have a NIST module and track as well, that the CSF, I've talked about that a couple of times. We obviously have the CRI profile. NIST is obviously very industry agnostic. It doesn't matter what industry you're in, doesn't matter your size, complexity. It's the same assessment no matter what. And there is benefits to that. It's the most widely adopted framework in the world. Everybody's pretty familiar with it. What I like about the CRI is not just the tailoring to it, the financial services space with all those mappings, the different frameworks and all those different sorts of things, but also, I know you mentioned you don't have an inherent risk section just yet, but at least you do have that ability to do the tiering assessment, right? So we are getting an idea of what it is based off of our size and complexity. Is that a fair assessment?
At a very gross level, I would not equate the profile tiering structure to an inherent risk assessment.
Sure.
It really is, quite frankly, just a fairly simple mechanism to try to divide the sector into four groups based on their risk to the sector, and scale the control expectations based on those four groups. It's not a lot more complex than that. It's not an assessment of the inherent risk of
Sure.
what threats, your particular institution might be facing.
And maybe I should reframe it. So maybe I appreciate you pushing back on me there. So maybe the better way to put it potentially is at minimum, it's going to take into consideration what impact you have as an institution. And therefore, you're not necessarily the smallest community bank is filling out the exact same assessment as, or dealing with the same statements necessarily as, a multi billion dollar
Yeah,
institution that's national.
yeah, absolutely. And that was part of the original architecture of the profile. Again, we had firms of all sizes contributing to it, and it was very clear from the beginning that the control expectations on a community institution are going to be very different and much less than on a global uh, GSIB.
And
So this was our mechanism to try to scale the control expectations appropriately.
I do think that lends to maybe easier is not the right word, but if people do think the CRI profile is kind of a bear to get through, at minimum, you have the ability to say it is going to customize itself essentially to your size potentially or complexity, things like that.
Yeah,
So
and I would say we have firms that take that in both directions. We have some firms that will take the recommended tier level, and they will actually respond to a number of the diagnostic statements not applicable, right?
mm,
This is, for example, if there are diagnostic statements on software development practices, they'll say, we don't do that. It's just not applicable. So just don't answer those things.
right.
Not expected to. On the other hand, we have a number of firms that actually what we call tier up. They may be, for example, a tier two organization, but they actually assess themselves as tier three because they
Mm,
want to say, okay, well, if the expectations were higher, we can show our board, hey, we actually meet some of these things up at the tier three level because we're so great. So we have
mm.
firms that do it both ways. So it's just it's a recommended starting point, but again, a lot of this is about tailoring to your environment and what what works for you, you know?
Absolutely. So, I'm not going to ask you to pick your favorite partner, John, but I'm gonna just recommend people take a look at Track. So if you have not made a decision yet, or if you're using our free version of NIST, or you're still using our CAT, we obviously, as I've talked quite a bit about here, do have a CRI profile module. I think there's lots of benefits that come with moving from the spreadsheet to a tool like Track. The spreadsheet's free, of course, and that's great. But some of the benefits I'll just talk about quickly, and I won't even, John, I've got other questions for you to respond to, but continuous risk tracking, action plans, and remediation management, so we can actually push areas of considerable risk that we're concerned about into action plans to remediate them. We do have easy to create and easy to read reporting. That is something that it is difficult sometimes to get out of a spreadsheet, some reporting. There are capabilities of that in Track, increased collaboration across teams, and then the ability to integrate into other risk assessments that we already have as well. So, certainly we are very excited about what the CRI profile looks in Track, and we're excited to grow alongside you guys as you do it. But maybe the question I would ask when we start talking about
maybe before you go there, I'm gonna have to remind you, Brett, that the other nice feature you have is, as I understand it, you can take an existing CAT assessment that you may have done in a spreadsheet, import it in, and then it'll pre-populate some of the profile responses for you to give you a jump start on your assessment.
So we are working on doing it from a spreadsheet. So I do have to correct that one.
Right.
If you have our CAT module, which I think we had almost every single customer that we have had the free version of the CAT. If your CAT answers are in there, we absolutely can move those over into the CRI profile if you choose to do so. We're working on the spreadsheet.
Okay. All right. Sorry to interrupt your.
No, I appreciate you mentioning that, because that is a big part of it, right? Being able to not have to worry about starting from scratch.
Yeah.
But the question I want to ask on this perspective from you is, if I'm using the profile correctly, and it's not just I'm doing it to check a box and say we've done it, what do you see? Let me again reframe it. If a bank is using the CRI profile the exact way you intend for them to use it, what does that help them do aside from just making sure we're meeting an obligation from a compliance perspective?
Well, I'd say there's two broad aspects to that. The first is, as with any assessment, you are ideally doing it consistently year over year, because it's really important, I think, not just in your reporting up to management, but really in your dialogues with management about what you're seeing in your gap analysis, right? Of where are we now? Where do we want to be? But to be able to show that kind of progress over time and what's changing over time. So we're absolutely seeing from some of our members that have been with us for a number of years, they are seeing huge benefits in being able to track program performance over time. That's a very key aspect of this, and certainly a tool like Track helps you in managing that. Trying to do that with spreadsheets can be pretty onerous, having done it myself in a private job. The other thing we see in a number of the more mature companies that have been using the profile for a little while is they're actually kind of reorganizing and reorienting their cyber programs such that it better aligns with how the profile is structured. So at a simple level, that's kind of organizing your policies, procedures, and so forth so that it more clearly maps to the profile diagnostic statements. But also things like if you have an issues tracking system or audit findings tracking system, being able to code those entries to particular diagnostic statement areas makes it much easier to collect evidence when you go to do your assessment. You can say, okay, well, I'm going to assess this particular statement. I'm going to grab whatever policies are related to that so I can find those quickly. I can also track, oh, we have 3 audit findings in this particular area. If I can do all of that and collect all of that, or the faster I can collect that evidence, the better it is for everyone, right? They're also aligning, in some cases, roles and responsibilities along the lines of the profile so that they can much more clearly say, you're in charge of this, subcategory area or diagnostic statement area. You're the one that's responsible for providing evidence, et cetera. And it streamlines the whole process for everyone.
Sure. And aligns it along the framework. I mean, again, that's why it's at the end of the day called a framework, right? I think using it in that manner, I think is really, I love that idea. I also think, and maybe you can speak to this as well, but we talk a lot about with track, it's driving decision making. So not just, okay, we did this, now we can say, here's our IT risk assessment, and okay, we're good to go for another year. But the people that are using it the best are using it to actually drive decision making. Where are our strengths? Where are our weaknesses? Where do we need to devote some resources? And I imagine the CRI profile is very much usable in the same way.
Yeah, exactly. I do tell people, if you're only using it for assessment, you're not getting the full value out of it.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the folks that may not have made a decision yet. I think what I've been hearing about it from an examination perspective, and I kind of touched on this earlier, is, okay, if you didn't move to something brand new, when the CAT sunsetted in August of last year, there was some sort of grace period. I think it was kind of like, within a certain time frame, you could use it for another 12 months. Sounds, John, like you're thinking that potentially it could continue to be used in the future, although with diminishing returns over time. I guess a couple of questions I would ask is, what are you hearing from examiners or customers or members that have dealt with examiners that are still using the CAT? To me, what I've heard is an examiner has come in typically in the last, probably from August to December, and said, okay, you don't have a brand new framework adopted yet that you've completed, but what are you going to move to? What direction are you headed, and how far along in that process are you? And I'd be open to hearing any other option or any other feedback that you may have about that.
Well, I think I would just have to repeat what I'd said earlier, that what we have heard directly from the regulators is your time is limited. We do consider it sunset, other than the NCUA. So really, the important thing is to have that conversation with your regulator. They absolutely want to see that you're taking this seriously and that you are doing something about it, that you are evaluating alternatives, that you have a timeline for making some kind of shift. That we've heard that consistently from the regulators' mouths directly.
Yeah, so I would sum it up, and this is Brett Rock speaking, not SBS, not Cyber Risk Institute, but I would say, if you haven't really decided yet, I think that decision's probably coming due pretty quickly here. And obviously we're happy to help, and I'm sure the Cyber Risk Institute, John, you guys have a lot of materials and different things that you can provide to aid people in that decision.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you should definitely be in due diligence mode if you haven't made the switch already.
So let's move on a little bit. I want to talk about kind of how it's evolved since last year, since we last spoke, and then I definitely want to get into kind of what's next. And I know you've got some very exciting things we've talked about that, again, I'm hopeful we'll have in track in the near future here. But from the time we spoke in April last year, kind of what are some of the big changes that you've seen with the profile, and maybe what are you most excited about?
Sure. So it was back in April, and I can't remember if it was before or after we talked, but we did release what we call the profile maturity model. The profile maturity model is really just an alternative scoring means for scoring an assessment of the profile. It uses a fairly simple 1 to 5 scale, but it provides a great deal of detail in terms of how do you judge for yourself whether you're at a level 2 for a particular diagnostic statement. It provides statement level guidance for each level to assess yourself. So it's a fairly it tries to strike the right balance of being prescriptive enough, but not too prescriptive in assessing yourself.
Sure.
And the main reason we developed the maturity model was one of the things that our members really want us to provide, that we're working on right now, is peer benchmarking.
Mhm.
They're all saying their boards want to hear, how are we doing against our peers? And, are we investing too much, too little, et cetera? So they really want us to get to good, anonymized, secure provision of benchmarking results. And so we're working and have had an RFI out to pursue this with some of our partner companies. We want to come up with a technical and business structure to be able to provide this, and also then be able to provide back out the peer benchmark results to our partners like SBS,
Mhm.
so that you can provide that as a service to your customers to say, not only here is your assessment result based on what you've done, but here is based on your tiering category or whatever, here is how your peers are doing. So that's one of the big threads we have in progress right now, is working on the benchmarking. And we'll use the
Mhm.
maturity model as the baseline scoring mechanism to make sure we're comparing apples to apples. And then, as we mentioned, just 2 or 3 weeks ago, we published the Financial Services AI Risk Management Framework. This is a completely new product for us. It is, in some ways, very similar to the profile, in that we took worked with NIST and took the NIST AI RMF, decomposed it into more specific control objective statements, similar to profile diagnostic statements, provided a lot of implementation guidance. What are examples of effective evidence? What are example controls? So forth, very similar to the profile. And then we also created with that kind of an adoption stage model. It's different than the tiering model and the profile, but it's really looking at, for your firm, at what stage of AI adoption are you generally? Are you just starting out and you're just getting your toes wet with, Copilot or something like that? Or, do you have AI fully embedded across, mission critical apps and making customer decisions and things like that? So we defined 4 adoption stages, and then we identify which of the control objectives are associated with those adoption stages. So if you're in the initial adoption stage, you really only have 20 control objectives that you should be trying to target. And then as you increase in your adoption stage, there's more and more. So anyway, all of that has now been published. There was a big press release by the Department of the Treasury and the FFIEC about that. It's available on our website for free. It's a free download. It's a huge volume of resources for institutions. We have a specific version just for the initial stage, so that, if you only want to look at what are the basics I need to do, there's a cut down version of the spreadsheet and the Word documentation just for that. So that is all out there now. We're thrilled about that.
Yep.
And then some of the things we're currently working on, as I mentioned, we're working on the common risk taxonomy and risk register for the sector. We're really excited about that. We've got a lot of excitement among our members for that because they're all doing it themselves. And then we've been asked to start looking at some kind of profile or profile alternatives for post-quantum readiness, as well as blockchain and digital assets. Can we come up with some, control framework for those things? Because again, we're trying to pool the resources of the sector because everyone's working on the same thing. They just want it to work on it once and take advantage of the common work, right?
Yeah, and I think we look forward to, hopefully we'll have some conversations here about how we can incorporate some of that into track as well. John, I do want to ask, and I want to save a couple of minutes here. Usually we do these, we don't get a lot of questions. I think to get some Q&A here. But one question I'll ask while I'm starting to pull that up. Obviously, you're talking about, you have the profile, you've got some, the AI pieces over here, the quantum piece might be another part of it. Do you anticipate kind of integrating those together at all?
Yes, actually, the risk framework that I mentioned, I think will provide that logical integration point. Because what we're seeing is that, looking across, for example, the AI risk management framework and the profile, there's a huge amount of commonality between the two in terms of the types of risk being addressed. A simple example is inventory. Um, Not having a good inventory can lead to a lot of bad things, right?
Right.
And that applies both in the risk AI domain, right? If you don't know what AI tools your staff are using, you could get into real trouble, depending on what they're using them for. As well as everyone knows, in the cyber domain, you absolutely have to have good inventory. So we've essentially created one risk statement that says, not having a good inventory is a bad thing. And then we map the controls from both frameworks to that same risk statement, right? So we see that as it should, your risk framework should really tie to directly the various controls you have in place to address those risks. And so that's what we're building out now. We kind of started from the bottom with the control framework, but now we're taking that up a level to the risk framework that feeds into. And then we've also got the piece on the threat side with, mappings to MITRE, and there'll be some
Sure.
other threat mappings coming as well.
So I pulled up some of the stuff that's in the chat, and I again, we're kind of coming up on the hour mark here, so I thought maybe we'll forego some of the another piece here that we were going to get to, at least in the interim here. Again, hopefully we'll have you on again soon when we start to roll out some of these changes too. But a lot of the chat in the chat box, as it happens, is about what people are hearing from their examiners currently in terms of moving to a different tool. And I think a theme that seems to be coming in, John, and I would appreciate any feedback you have here. I have some thoughts on it, but it does seem to be the case that there's not a lot of guidance from the examinatory, the regulators about what you should move to. And that may be frustrating, but I think that's intentional, right? It does seem like they've been trying to keep their thumb off the scale a
Yeah.
little bit. Is that what you're hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. That they see that as kind of their role, is to not advise on any one specific solution for you. It's really should be a decision made by the institution. So you will not see statements from any regulator anywhere in the world that says you should do it this one way. It's just they don't consider it their role to make those kind of pronouncements.
And I think the cynical person or the skeptical person may think, well, they said the same thing when the cat came out, right? That this is not you don't have to do the cat. You can do whatever you want. You have to do some sort of maturity assessment. But it seemed like they were getting asked for the cat every time an examiner came in. To me, at least in all the conversations I've had with regulators, I'm hearing the exact same thing you just mentioned, which is this time we're serious. We're not picking anything for you. Pick what you want, pick the framework that suits you the best, jump in with both feet, use it to get better, all those sorts of things. Is that along the lines of what you're hearing as well?
Yes, exactly.
Um, so I know that's not probably doesn't come as great comfort to anybody that's talking about that in the chat, but I think again, this is me talking and not SBS, and certainly I wouldn't speak for John or the Cyber Risk Institute, but if you are a financial institution, and kind of the way I've always put it is ask yourself the question of how much it matters to you that the framework you use is built specifically for you as a financial institution. If that doesn't matter that much to you, I think there are other frameworks that make a lot of sense, including our NIST one. If it does matter to you, then I think the CRI profile is probably the route to go. John, again, I won't put words in your mouth, but I don't know if you have a thought on that.
Well, I'm of course
Yeah, biased.
biased on this issue, but certainly, again, having done this before, NIST is absolutely a great framework. CIS is a wonderful framework. It's much more technically focused on technical controls. You might have to augment it with some of the more, governance, third-party risk would need to be expanded. But pick what's right for you. I mean, do some due diligence. Kind of envision in your mind what it's going to be like to either perform an assessment or under any of these. But the good side to what you're saying about they're not putting their thumb on the scale is you should be able to use any of the ones they recommended and be okay. They should not give you any grief if you use either the NIST CSF, CIS, or the profile. Which, by the way, the fourth one they talked about which is based on the cyber performance goals that CISA developed. We worked on that with them. That's actually a CRI product. It's not been published yet. We're expecting it to be published in the next couple of months. It's been sitting on the shelf literally for almost 18 months between the two administrations. But the minimum cyber standards for the sector will be based on the profile.
So, John, obviously, thank you so much for being a part of this. Thanks for answering questions and having a great conversation, and we'll hope to have you back soon. I want to end on this question that came in. I know you've got an update that's coming up pretty soon. Somebody asked when the next one is coming up, so I wanted to give you a minute here to talk about that.
Sure. Just very briefly, version 2.2 of the profile should be coming out in April. In that version, there will be no changes to the profile structure or diagnostic statements. Our members wanted to leave it static for the next version. That version will primarily just consist of about a dozen new mappings in our mappings catalog. And in particular, this group might be interested in, there'll be an ISO 27001 mapping, to the Conference of State Bank Supervisors. Ransomware assessment will be in that batch. So it'll mainly just be some additional mappings. And then in version 3.0, which we'll start working on shortly here, that's when we'll start to leaven in some very targeted changes to diagnostic statements based on, what's evolving in the sector and in cybersecurity.
Well, John, again, can't thank you enough for being a part of this and for being a great partner of ours. We look forward to continuing to growing our version of the profile alongside you here, continue to make the track module better and more effective. But I think it's very exciting what you're doing. I think I've learned a lot about it and talked a lot about it in the last year. So I feel like I almost feel like I've got a stake in it as well. And certainly I would encourage anybody that's interested in learning more about the Cyber Risk Institute and becoming a member to check out your website. It's easy enough to find if you Google Cyber Risk Institute, certainly. But anybody who did not get a question answered, I will certainly follow up. And if I can't answer it, I'll bug John about it. But certainly appreciate you being on here today.
Oh, absolutely my pleasure.
All right, thanks, guys. Have a great day.